so I guess we'll get started. Just so you're fully aware, because I had this happen last night, there was like 35 people in the class, like when we started at 7 o'clock. And then once they realized there wasn't going to be a midterm, there was 8. So just so you know, there is no midterm in this class because unfortunately we haven't progressed far enough that it's any value to do a midterm at this point. So instead, we'll have a 30% final. But that also leads to the other factor that the other 3 parts that I was going to assign you for the project, so parts 4, 5, and 6, unfortunately require you to know the model view controller part of this, and we're not going to get there. It was probably a little ambitious. So the parts that you're working on now, part 1, 2, and 3, that's the project. That will be the full project. So I'm going to change the due date, make it due in December. And there'll be a presentation element to it that will be added on. And then that will be worth the total marks of the project. Obviously, what the original points that were assigned to it originally will be broken up amongst the 4 parts. So you'll still get the same marks. Everything else still the same, just less work now. That's all. And hopefully that should work out. So the final test will be worth 30%. I will be issuing another quiz soon. I will try to make sure that we wind up with 10 quizzes, no matter what. So at least we have 10 quizzes in this class. And that should be able to help you kind of see how you're progressing along and whether or not you're kind of meeting the requirements of this class. That being said, too, my tests are a little bit odd. I do industry tests, which are essentially I assign you I give you a little practical and you work in a group and then you do the practical in the group. And then you submit your practical and then I mark it. And that's the way I do it. There is a individual component though. So half the test is worth 50%. The individual component will be in Blackboard. You'll answer the Blackboard questions. They're random. They're drawn from a pool. It's very rare that people get the same question. So that's the way that part works. So that way I can easily grade each of you individually. And then there's the group part where you can work in a group or not. Totally your choice. You do it a practical. I give you the starter files. Most of it's filled out. It's really just going in and adding the extra little tiny bits that need to be added. That's it. But that's not for another 6 weeks or so. So 7 weeks. I mean, we're already, mid-October? It's hard to believe it's already the 20th. The 16th of October? Close enough. All right. I'm going to X out of this. And X out of this. Cool. So last week we got a little further. We did our partials, and we had all of our partials completed. And then we did, not last week, sorry, the week before. I didn't post the lesson last week because I figured it's just better if we do it together. But we did do index and show. And we had the ability to see all of our users, and we also had the ability to go see one individual user, right? So we were all nicely caught up. So let's just make sure all of that's in place. What I would like to do is open up WAMP right off the bat. So just go ahead down to Cortana, tell her you want to open WAMP, and hit enter. Let it boot up its little windows. And then we should get our little green icon in the bottom right-hand corner. And then we might as well open this up in our IDE. So go ahead and open up your IDE. That's your code editor, right? You might already have a project open in there, no worries. And then the easiest way I find to open our projects up in these things so that we can work on them and we make sure that we're in the correct folder, because we have to be in that www folder, right? Or if we're using XAMPP, we have to be in the htdocs folder. The way I find it the easiest is just to click on the W down here. Or if you're using htdocs, I think htdocs allows you to open in Finder. Scroll up through here where it says www directory. And if you click on that, it'll open up the File Explorer in the www directory already. This is the directory that gets served to the browser, right? There's our Comp 1006 folder. So just double click so you're in there. And then if you have VS Code installed, you might be able to right click on your lesson 4 and choose to open with code. If it says Visual Studio, don't do it that way because Visual Studio is a great big beastly thing. You just want the with code. If it's not there, the other way to do it is to literally just drag it into the editor and let go, and that will open it up into the editor for you. And I'm sure these are ridiculously huge, yet that would be absolutely terrible to try to follow along. I'll zoom out a little bit. And if you can't see that, please move up. Now, I've lost all my really nice synthwave highlighting, so let me just re-enable that. I don't know why it's important, but it's important to me. There we go. Now it's back. Cool. So there's our lessons open. We've got our files all ready to go, and we have our WAMP server running. So let's jump over to our browser and navigate to localhost /comp-1006. Click on your lesson 4, and that should take you into the current state of our application. And it should look like mine. You should have your home page link, your About Me link, the Contact Me link, the profile page, the users dropdown, which should contain a create new user and a view all users, log in, register, and log out. Likely by the end of today, based on last night's class, we will get to create a user, and that's about it. We won't be able to get much further than that. So no log in or log out yet. So let's just make sure everything's in place. Go ahead and click on View All Users. You should see a list of users. And I'm noticing that they're not linked, which means maybe we didn't get to show. I'm thinking we didn't get to show. Let me double check. No, I guess we didn't get to show. Cool. I thought we did. Let me see something. Do you have this page up or no? I don't have something. Okay, no worries. No, navigate back to just the users. Okay, so yeah, we didn't get there. Sometimes my code gets jumbled about. All right, so we definitely need to complete creating the links for the users. Obviously, that would make things handy. Would it be beneficial to you then if I posted the current state of the code up onto Blackboard so you can download it? Yeah, I'll do that for you. It's not a worry. No problem. Let me just back this up. Yeah, no worries. Blackboard was down. If it's still down, I'll just post it into Slack. But I think it might be up. You guys are group 3, I believe. Are you 2? Let's see. Yes, 3. All right. I'll just shove it right into lesson 4 here, and I will call it current state. Ah, right there, current project state. So when you extract those files, just extract them directly into that www directory and make sure they're in your lesson 4. Just overwrite what's existing in there. That did not sound good. Oh, never mind. It's just college property. All right. So we're a little further behind, but you know what? You guys are a pretty quick group, so I think we'll actually get through this part pretty fast anyways, and we should be caught up within the next 20 minutes or so it shouldn't be a big deal. So where we ended last time was we were showing all the users. We have a big user list. There's 10 users in there, and they're coming from the database, the Comp1006 database that we created. So you can see each of their names, their email address, the date that they were created on, and the timestamps that they were created on as well. And I auto-generated these timestamps so they're all nice and different, so that way if you want to perform any logic that's based on time, you can. So the next step is to turn these into links so that we can actually go see a user, see an individual user. But I think our first step should be to actually make it so that the show page actually works. So if we click up here right beside users, and we go to show.php and hit enter, that'll take us to our show.php page. Out of curiosity, did we talk about SuperGlobals? I'm going to guess not. Okay. So PHP has a way for us to actually pass information from page to page, like variables, right? So that we can pass a variable with some information to the next page. And the reason why we need to be able to do that is because the browser is stateless. It has no state. So if I define a variable in one page, it is not available to me in another page, right? So what I need to do is I need to use PHP's SuperGlobals. And there's 3 that we're going to use in this class. There's many more. There's actually quite a few more. There's server, there's cookies, there's, what else is there? Server, cookies, globals. There's a whole bunch of them. But the 3 we're going to use are get, which is a way to actually pull variable arguments from the URL. Post, which is our way to be able to grab data from a form. And then session, which is a way for us to store values for the length of the time that the user is in our application. So we're going to use those 3 particular SuperGlobals. So the get one, I think what we'll do is the same thing that I did with Tuesday's class last week. I'll show you this in a non-project format so that you can actually see it and just work with it raw. So why don't we go to our IDE. Let's just create a new file right in this folder, and we'll call it superglobal.php. SuperGlobals are such a complex topic that I think it's definitely warrants its own file for you to be able to have some notes on it. Okay. So obviously this is just going to be a PHP straight up file for now. So we'll just add our PHP tag at the top. Actually, we will have a form, so do a closing tag as well. I'm going to add a comment here and just say get values. A comment here and say post values. And a comment here and call it session values. All right, let's do this in nice little steps. So the first thing I want to talk about is get values. Often when you guys go to a website, like actually probably one of the most famous websites out there, this one, right? And you type in a search, right? Any search. My go-to to check the internet is boo. Siri, go away. Stop doing things. There we go. All right, boo, yeah. Usually it comes with the little dog, but I guess because we're close to Halloween, I think the dog is there. The dog is much cuter than that. Where's the dog? There's the dog. Look at this dog. That dog is ridiculous. That's a real live dog. Anyways, this is a good point. Up here, you'll see our address is actually google.com/search. That's our complete URL, okay? Everything that trails after search where it says the question mark, everything after that point is query parameters. That's what it stands for, query parameters, which is really just a fancy way of saying key and value. That's all it is, just keys and values. So the first key there is Q, right? So you can see it up there. We have a key called Q, and Q's value is equal to boo. That's what the value is. So we have Q and we have boo. Then we have a plus sign. So it actually looks like it's a little bit further than that. So it goes plus dog. There we go. That's our whole value. And I know where our value stops because our value will stop at the ampersand character. So the ampersand character that you can see up there is the one that looks like, and I draw these really crappily. I'm really sorry. I have to do it quick. Haha, there you go. That's the ampersand character. Everything that follows after that is a new key value. So every time you hit an ampersand, the direct word that follows is a new key, right? So what key is following that? We have SA. So that's our next key. And it is equal to the upper letter X. And then I've got another ampersand. And then this one, the next one is RLZ. And then it's equal to something I'm definitely not writing out, a big gobbledygook line, right? And I'm sure there's probably a few more if you go down the string. PHP gives us a very simple way to access these parameters. When we actually send these in a string, in our parameter after our URL, we can easily access these using the SuperGlobal known as get. Get will access that information. Let's go back to our IDE. Okay. So get values. I actually want to see the get values. Well, I can do that by one, dumping them. So I'm going to use the dump function. The dump function will take whatever I put into it, whether it's a variable with a flat value, like just a literal value, an array, a hash, a class, doesn't matter. It will just dump it out entirely so we can see its structure. So var dump, and then we're going to type in the name of the superglobal. All superglobals start with a $sign, but all variables do anyways. An underscore, just one. And then it should give you a list. Your IDE should give you a list of all the superglobals that are available. The one we want is get. So the superglobal variables, they store a hash of keys and values. And those keys will be these parameter keys that are in the URL, and the values will be whatever follows the equal sign next to them. So let's go test this. Let's open up this file. That dog is insanely cute. So I'm going to back up users so that I'm just at the root of our lesson, right? So lesson 4, and then I'm going to go to superglobal.php. And it should take me here, and I should have an empty array. Var dump's really nice because it gives you a lot of information. It tells you what file this has happened in, what file you're actually outputting this in, what line it's happening on. So it's happening on line 4. I'll zoom in a little bit. I can see you guys squinting. So it's happening on line 4. It tells you what data type you've given it. So we've given it an array. It tells you its current content size, which there's 0 elements in our array. And it even gives you a word empty because there's nothing in it. So let's publish some information into it. The way we can actually add new parameters to the get is we don't even have to leave this page. We don't need to go back to our IDE. We can do it right directly up here in the URL. What you can do is type in a question mark. Now, it's going to be a little tricky to see my screen, but essentially, we're going to type a question mark, then name, equals, and just put your first name in. I'm going to put my first name in. Okay? Then we're going to do an ampersand to tell it that we want a second value pair. And I'm going to do age equals my age. So I've got my question mark. I'm going to type in name equals Sean, ampersand, which you can find by hitting Shift 7, age equals 40. Actually, I think I can bring up the, yes, I can. Oof. There you go. You can kind of see it. Not very well, but you can kind of see it. There. So superglobal.php, the name of our file, the question mark to tell the browser that we're creating a set of parameters and values, and then the first name of our the first key of our parameter, which is name, and then the first value, which is Sean, ampersand to signify that we're going to add another key value pair, and then we do age and 40. So if you wanted to add another one, just put your cursor at the end, type another ampersand, create any key you want, right? I'm going to write color, and I'm going to say blue. And hit enter, and you'll see that now we have that as part of our global set. Now get, this parameter only lives for one complete request cycle. If we put this as a URL on an anchor link, right, and we click it, it will last till the next page. Once that page is done, though, and we navigate away from that page, we lose all that information. It disappears after that. So it only lasts for one complete request. Same with post. When we submit our form, it will go to the next place that you want it to submit to. The data will live there and then die the second you leave that page. So right now we're var dumping all this. If we want to actually access this data and do something with it, if you jump back to your editor, and we'll just comment out the var dump for now. On the next line, why don't we just write a nice statement, hello, and we'll use string interpolation, which is these curly braces, right? And then we just type the variable right inside there, name, you are $_ get age, years old. Whoops, don't want to put that inside those curly braces. Outside, years old. Your favorite color is $_ get blue. Oh, color, not blue. And semicolon. So you'll notice the way we access each of those parameters is by directly accessing the key that we defined in the URL. And you'll remember the three keys we defined are name, age, and then I defined a third key called color, right? You may have defined a key that's different. If you put color in here and you haven't defined color, then obviously it won't output anything. You'll get a reference error. So make sure you use the key that you used. All right. You guys still typing? Anybody still typing? Okay, so if we jump back over to our browser and hit refresh, you should see the sentence that you typed out with the values in the sentence, right? If I want to change those values, all I have to do is change the values in the URL. So I'll say George, and George is 6, and his favorite color is red. There. Hello, George. You're 6 years old. Your favorite color is red. And all I'm doing is just changing the values in the URL, right? Aqua, polka dot. Polka dot's a little tougher. You can write a space, but the browser will autofill it with a 20% because it won't allow spaces in the URL. It'll translate it correctly, but it'll populate it with the 20% thing. Like I said, though, this only lives for this request. That is it, right? So if I back all of this information back up again and remove everything except for superglobal.php and then hit enter, all that information I put inside that get variable is going to disappear. It only lives for the one request. See, gone. Now I have a bunch of errors because all my references no longer work, right? So if we jump back here, I don't want a bunch of errors, so I'm going to comment out the echo, and I'll leave the get, the var dump get, back in place because it won't throw an error, because we're not actually accessing a key. Any questions about get variables and query parameters? No? Okay, pretty straightforward. Yeah, not too bad. We're going to be using them quite a bit, so you'll get used to them anyway. Post values. Post values are the same as get. The difference is the method, the HTTP method that they were sent in, and then what PHP actually does with it. So if PHP gets a HTTP method request from get, it will store whatever your query parameters are in the get body, in the get superglobal. If it gets it via post, it will store it into a post variable. And we can demonstrate this. Why don't we create ourselves just a tiny little form at the bottom here. So we'll create a form. Don't give it an action or anything. No action or method. We'll just create an input. We'll give the input a name. That's super important because if we don't have a name, the PHP can't create those keys. It needs the name in order to create the keys. So I'll just say first name. And then I'm just going to hit Alt-Shift, press down, and do last name. Right? I mean, we can do a label too. Might as well, so that we know what we're typing in. And I'll Alt-Shift that one too. And then hold Alt to bring it down one, and then I'll add a break tag. And then last name. And then obviously this is a form, so I need another break tag, and then I need a button. And I'll just do button type submit. Button. Button. Let's call my button button. Or write submit. That's probably more practical. Don't call your button button. So I'm not sure if you remember this from your HTML class. If you don't provide an action and you were to submit this form, where will the form go? Where will the data from the form go? Yeah, it'll go right back to the page you're on. So whatever page you submitted from is exactly where the data will go back to. So we're on SuperGlobal, so all that data is going to come back. By default, what HTTP method does it use to submit? Does it use get or post? By default. Uses get, exactly. So by default, it will submit to the page you're on, and it will use the get HTTP method, which means that all this information will show up inside that get variable because it will get added to it. Make sure you take advantage of copy and paste. It's your best friend here. All right. Can we move on? Or yep. All right. Jump back over to the page. Hit refresh. You should see your first name, last name, and a button. The get variable is currently empty. Type in your first name, type in your last name, and then hit the button. And you will notice that the two values have been added to our get SuperGlobal, and we can see them. This is the name that we gave the first input. This is the name that we gave the second input. This is the value that you put into both of those inputs, right? But this is get, and this is the way get works. And you'll also notice if you look up at your address bar, you will see that it has created automatically the query parameter string for you and added it into your address bar right off the bat. All right, so let's see if we can get it into the post SuperGlobal. To get it into the post SuperGlobal, it's super easy. Just let's var dump $_post this time and save it. And then we need to modify our form a little bit. We need to give it an attribute that will tell it what HTTP method to use. And the name of that attribute, I'm sure you can guess, is method. And we make it equal to post, exactly. So now what will happen is the values in our form will go to this page and be picked up in the SuperGlobal post. However, there's a bit of a glitch here. If I go in here and I type in, well, first I need to refresh so the post takes effect. Here it is. But you're going to notice that I've refreshed and I still have these values under get, right? I'm going to type in new values, Bob, and his last name is Nicholson. And I'm going to hit button. And this time they show up under the post SuperGlobal, but I still have these under the get SuperGlobal. Why are those still sitting under the get SuperGlobal? No, not because the get's not commented out. Look at our URL. We still have all the query parameter defined under the URL, right? So if I want to get rid of those, all I need to do, back this up right to the question mark, hit delete, hit enter. It's now empty. Now I can go ahead and add in my new information down here, hit the button, and now you can see it's in post. There's no parameters added to the URL, and the get is empty. Looks like magic, but it really isn't. Cool? Yeah? Cool. So the problem here, though, with all of this, no matter what, only lasts for one request, right? Even post. Post values only last for one request. My request is complete. I've used my values. If I hit refresh on this page, well, I can actually resubmit the form again. But if I click up here and hit enter, that counts as a brand new request, and I lose my values entirely. They're gone. So what do I do if I want my values to persist? If I want to keep my values for, say, the whole time that a user is sitting on in my application. Maybe they're shopping, right? And I have a shopping cart, and I want to keep track of their stuff. Well, I need some way to do that from page to page to page. I mean, I could jam them all up inside the URL, but the URL is going to get pretty ridiculous after a while, and I have to remember to do that. It means I would have to pull the URL down every time, rebuild it out, and add a new thing to that URL. Then I would also have to parse that URL if they were to remove something from it. It'd be a headache. It wouldn't be worth my time. There's a much better super global when we need to take data and transfer it from page to page to page, and we need it for the life cycle of the user when they're in our application, and that's called sessions. Sessions are super handy. They last till the user closes the browser. Once they close the browser, the session is destroyed, and then their data is gone. But they have to close the browser in order for that to happen. Incidentally, there is one other super global you can use if you need the data to persist even after they close the browser and they come back. Does anybody know what that might be called? What's that? Somebody say cookies? Cookies is what you're looking for. Cookies are a small bit of your hard drive, right? A little bit of memory that get allocated to websites and that the developer can actually utilize to store a little bit of information. However, big important detail, cookies are not reliable because the user can actually install Chrome extensions or just turn off cookies entirely in the security options under Chrome or under any browser. You can't guarantee the user will have the cookies value. So cookies are really only ever used for user experience, right? So the user logged in and you want to maintain that they've logged in. You add a cookie saying this user has logged in. Next time they go, they're still logged in. Yay for them. But if they delete the cookie and they come back and they're no longer logged in, that hasn't broken their experience, right? They still can access the site. They still have access to everything else. We don't need to rely on that cookie. Cookies are only for things that you don't need to rely on, but you want to create a better user experience. Sessions, however, are completely reliable. Sessions are set on the server, and when you create a session variable, it lives for the lifespan while the user is in the application. It is hidden from them. They can't access it from the front, which means you don't have to worry about storing sensitive data into the session key or into the session variables because the user can't access it from the front. Well, you should still worry because there are things like man-in-the-middle attacks where people can actually hijack the session. So don't store sensitive data. The one thing you can do, though, is guarantee the data will be where it needs to be because it persists. So how do we actually use sessions? Well, unfortunately, to use sessions, we have to do a couple of things. One, we have to access the current session that is in progress. We can either create a brand new one, right, which a lot of developers will do, so they wind up with a brand new unique session, or we can just resume the one that is already currently in action. When you go to a website, you immediately activate a session on that server. It happens with any website you go to, any server you access, you immediately create a session. That's how we're able to keep you and your actions on that website unique from other users that are accessing that website. You each have your own session, right? So what we can do here is we can access the current session that's already in play. And the way that looks is it's session start, and that's a function. So that will access the current session. And then once we've done that, we can now read or write to the super global $_session. So let's go ahead and access $_session. And we'll store a value in there. My value equals Yowzers. And then if I want to dump that value out, not very hard, I just type in bar_dump $_session. And then once you've got all that written out, you can jump back over to your browser, hit refresh, and what you will see is the session variable dumped out to the screen. And you should just see one value sitting in there with the key my value and the value Yowzers. There we go. Notice all three of these are the same data type. And I think I've told you guys before that PHP, it has arrays, but it also has hashes. The difference between a hash and an array, there's not a lot of difference. An array uses integers as a way to index. Hashes use strings usually to index, right? PHP kind of, they're all hashes. It's just when you use an array, it will fill it in with the 0 to whatever number of items you have automatically for you, but it is still just a hash. They are the same thing. All right. Cool. So we have this here. So let's look at something a little interesting. Put your cursor at the end of that line. Hit Control / so you comment it out. So I've commented out this variable and this value. It is now gone, right? Commented out. So when I go back to the browser, if this applies like it does with post and get, it should be empty, right? The session variable should be completely empty. So if I go back and I hit refresh, oh, it's not empty. And the reason for that is because once you have set a variable, it will persist till our application closes entirely. That means the browser. You have to close the browser in order to get rid of that actual variable name. Actually, I'm curious. I'm going to copy the URL. I'm going to close the tab. I'm going to open a new tab, paste it in, hit enter. Yep, see, even with a new tab, the data persists. Now I'm going to just close my browser entirely. Reopen a brand new Chrome instance. Hit Control V. Control V. There we go. Hit enter. Now it's gone. Right? And that's because the session will live for the lifespan of the whole browser instance. Once the browser is closed, the session value will disappear. All right. So what do we do when we have values like this? How do we get rid of them once they're actually defined? And the easiest way to get rid of them, so I'm going to put this value back in. I'm going to save it, jump back to my browser, hit Control R. There it is. Now to get rid of it, I'm going to unset it. So I type in unset $_session my_value. And that will actually clear the value that is currently in there and also unset the variable, which under the hood means it actually goes to the memory allocated space and it frees it. So now the memory allocated space is available again. We can see that if we type in var dump one more time, but I'm super lazy. I'm just going to Alt Shift down and Alt down once. So I can just create it underneath. Or you can just copy and paste. That works too. So this one is going to say Yowzers, but this one should be empty because we've unset the session value, right? So now if I jump back, nope, not notes, nope, geez. Hit refresh. You can see we have Yowzers in this one where we've set the variable. Then between these two, we've unset it, and now it is completely empty, right? One more thing with sessions just before we move on. I'm going to take this variable, Alt Shift down, bring it down below here, and I'm going to create a new value inside of it. Probably one of my favorite words. Boo-raka-cha. There's another way to actually clear our session. The only problem is that this will clear all the variables inside your session. So it purges them all. So if you've set 45 variables and you call this, all of them are gone. You're not going to get them back. It clears every single one of them. And that is session underscore, or maybe it's clear session. Why can't I remember what it is? Hold on. I wrote it down. Oh, I didn't write it down, actually. Let me quickly check that. PHP, clear session. Thought it was session underscore clear, but maybe it's not. No, it's not session destroy. Or maybe it is. Maybe that's why I can't find it. Oh, it's session unset. That's what it is. Yeah. So it's session underscore unset. That's just a function call. Session destroy is a little bit different because what session destroy will do is right now we have this session. This session is under a key and it manages that session. So even when we do an unset, we still have the same session. We haven't changed sessions. Session destroy actually eliminates that session entirely. We get a brand new session with a brand new session key, and then we start working on it. So session destroy is only if you want to actually clear the session entirely. So session unset will unset our session, and this value that we've defined in here, if I var dump it out, we won't see anything because we've cleared all the variable values under session. So I'm going to jump back to my browser, hit Control R, and sure enough, we get no value in here, right? So get, just to recap, get and post lasts for one request. That's it. Once the request is complete, both those values are gone. You don't get them back, right? Get is used for get requests. All get requests will be stored underneath the get SuperGlobal, okay? Get requests are when you go to your address bar and type the query parameters directly in, or you follow a link that already has query parameters in it. Post, generally used for forms, and basically will store any value passed through an HTTP post method. When you send the form, all those values in your form get stored in the post body, and then that gets written into the post SuperGlobal, okay? Both of those, once again, only last for one request, and then they're gone. Sessions last for the life cycle of the browser. As long as the browser is open, the session will persist throughout the life cycle of the browser. Once you close the browser, the session will disappear. Get is good when you're just reading data. That's generally when we use get. We don't use get to manipulate data. So that means we don't use get to destroy things. We don't use get to edit things, and we don't use get to create things, okay? It's more semantics, not really much to do with security. It's just more about semantics. Semantics is meaning for logic-based things. Posts we use for primarily manipulating objects, right? Manipulating data. So if we're going to create new data, or we're going to edit data, or we're going to destroy data, then we use post generally for those type of things. All of these, like I said before, only happen through one request, which makes sense because it should only ever happen for one request when you're doing any CRUD operation. Session is more for things that you need to persist across multiple requests or potentially multiple requests. Generally, that's for things like a user logged in, right? You want to maintain that the user is logged in, so you would maintain them in the session for the entire time they're there, right? Flash notifications, which are like little messages. You know when you fill out a form and it says you've successfully logged in or you successfully created a new user, those little messages are usually stored inside the session variable. That way they can be accessed even if you switch to a totally different page. It doesn't matter. You'll still see it. So it will live across multiple requests because it will live for the life cycle of the session. And then the last one is kind of a weird one, but it's form data. So when you fill out like a big form and you make a mistake, you know how it kicks you back, but your form's not empty and you can still actually continue on or edit the fields that you have? That's because they've taken your form data and passed it back through the session so that you have access to the same stuff that you wrote before. Nothing's more frustrating when you fill out a big form, make a mistake, get kicked back, and it's cleared. That sucks, right? So we're going to use all three of these today, which will give you more experience, but we're going to use them in our project. So just keep this file around, right? We're already unset the session, so we're probably good. Make sure you run that page so that your session is unset. That way you don't have these variables floating around. And then go ahead and close that page. All right. So in order for us to get to where we need to be, we'll take the break directly after this. I'm going to go back to users show PHP. This page is basically it's like the index page, except for instead of showing all of the users, we're only going to show one user. And obviously, if I want to filter all the users down to just one user, I need some sort of data piece that allows me to filter down conditionally to a unique value. So we have two unique values on each of our users that we can use. We have their email address, right? That's a unique value because no two users can have the same email address because that's their username. And we have the ID, right? If you look at the lesson plan, give it a second. Heroku takes a little bit to load when it's free. Today. It's not a slow website. It's just the Heroku, when you use the free account, after 30 minutes of inactivity, it shuts the server off. So it actually has to boot the whole docs back up again in order for you to view your page. All right. If we look at the data from, maybe I zoom past it. Usually I can see things quickly. I think it's after this, actually. Yeah, here it is, right here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. A lot of it. There we go. All right, so this is the SQL. And I did say this is not a SQL class. We're not going to learn to write SQL. But I will briefly explain what this table is doing because it might be slightly different than some of the stuff that you guys have written in your SQL class. So hopefully, I'm just going to get a show of hands. How many of you understand what that line is doing? So a few of you. So what is that line doing? Somebody want to give me an idea? Yeah. Go ahead. Yep. Right. That's exactly it. What's not null doing? Yeah, exactly. So not null is an attribute that can be applied to any field, right? So these are all fields. And you'll notice that we have not null in quite a few spots. And the reason for that is because all those fields have to be populated. What will happen in MySQL, if you send it information and you don't have the fields that are required filled out, it'll reject your insert and it won't allow the insert to be put in, right? And it will tell you need to fill out these fields. So we have an ID column, an auto-incrementing ID column. We have a first name and a last name with the character length set to 20. It's usually a good idea to set your character length. It's one more way to avoid issues with like cross-site scripting and stuff like that because you're not giving the person enough space in the field to be able to type extra crap in that, right? They can only type their name. They can only type their last name. Not too many people in the world with last names longer than 20 characters. Their email address, you give them up to 50 characters. The avatar, which we're controlling anyways, so we can actually set exactly how much we want. But the pieces that are going to seem unusual, first name, last name, email, avatar, and password should all seem familiar to you. They're just varchars, right? An ID is just an auto-incrementing integer channel. The role, enum, that's going to seem slightly different. Have any of you seen the enum field before? Yeah? What does it do? What's its purpose? Right. Those values in that column. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So enum gives you, think of it like an array. It's like an array of possible values for that field. However, it's restrictive in that the field can only ever be the values that are in that array. They can't be something else. They can only be those values, okay? Which is great for things like roles, statuses, stuff like that. Things that need to follow a naming convention and need to be restrictive because you actually rely on them in your system, right? Like our system, for example, will actually check the user's role. So we need to be able to rely on that data. We can't let, any person just type in whatever the role name is because you want to be able to control what it looks like so you can, that way you can actually compare against it and actually get back a proper response. The not null, not necessary because we've actually set a default anyways, but it's usually common practice. The default in this scenario will actually set the default value to general, which means we can insert users. We don't need to actually provide a role when we do the insert because it will automatically default to general anyways, right? That's the benefit of that. These two columns are going to seem slightly new. What they are date stamps. Timestamp is kind of an interesting column. Timestamp basically says that only a date can be in this field, and that's a data type that's built into MySQL. This piece here, current timestamp, so the default is the current timestamp. This is a command. This is a MySQL command that will actually return back a date. Right, it's that second that is called. So when you create the record, at the exact second the record is made, it will take the current timestamp and add it. The next piece is a little different. This one happens current timestamp on update current timestamp. So the default is the current timestamp. Okay, so that is the same as the one above. That's exactly the same thing. However, we've added a clause that says on update. So anytime the record is updated, it will change the time to the current timestamp of that time. So when we insert the record, both of those will be the same time. When we go back and change our password or change our username, the updated timestamp will change to that particular point where we actually created an update. The reason why I've added these is because if you start getting into big systems like model view controller systems through Laravel, Symfony, all these different MVC frameworks that are out there, or you're working in, I think even WordPress does it. There's a whole bunch of different frameworks that do it. They automatically add these two fields for you. And they're very, very handy because you're able to tell when a user has committed or done some sort of change or when the user actually became a part of your database, right? But not even just that. Think about people who are going to argue with you, well, I never added anything to my cart on that day. I wasn't even on your website. Well, actually, you were. The updated at timestamp says that you made a change at this particular time. So you can use it to kind of like a history to be able to see, when things were changed. Then the insert statement, you guys are probably used to that. It's just a big block of users that we insert into our database. Any questions about this particular thing? No, it's more just being aware of it and understanding that this is what's running in the background. This is the thing that we're pushing our users to. This is the thing that will actually handle some of the authentication process that we have. So I just want you more to be aware of it and just to be aware of these extra little fields. Cool. Did we build the form? I don't think we did. Actually, no, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We need to do this user page. So this user page, what we can do is we can use one of those columns. We can either use the ID column or we can use the email column in order to reference a user. And the easiest way to do that is just using the query parameters, right? Question mark, we'll use ID because that makes the most amount of sense. And I'll use ID 10 because I know one of the users in the database has ID 10. And the reason why I'm going to use a query parameter is two reasons. One, I only want it to last for this request, right? So I only need to make sure it lasts for the one request, and then it will just disappear after that. So I don't want to use sessions because it doesn't make sense. And two, I can actually take that URL and I can make it a hyperlink, right? So in where I have the index of my users, I can now make them all link and look like that format so that we have links directly to each user's profile, right? First, let's get this user to work so that we can actually see this user. Open up users, show.php. We have our connect script up at the top. I'm just going to clear out this commenting because it's in my way. So my first step is to create my SQL statement. $SQL equals a string, and the string will be select star from users. Now that will select all of the users. Where, have you guys done where clauses in SQL? Good. Where ID equals, and we're not going to type the ID in raw. Instead, we'll use a bound parameter placeholder. So colon ID. Once you've done that, our next step is to prepare this statement. When we prepare the statement, it basically locks down the SQL command, and then it takes the bound parameters and it will only let literal values be put into those places, which means only literal strings, only literal integers, floats. You can even use an array if you wanted to, depending on what the value needs to be, but it can only be the literal values. So first thing we need to do, we'll create a variable called statement and make it equal to our connection, which we're pulling from this, which is defined under the connect.php. Prepare $SQL. So that will prepare the statement, and the statement will be waiting for us to bind the actual value to our parameter. Now we're going to bind the parameter, so stmt with the skinny arrow, bind, I think it's actually bind param. Bind param. Let me just find it so I don't make a mistake here. Yeah, it's bind param. Bind value is different. Set of quotes. Make sure you don't hit a space here. I see a lot of people doing this because they like the way it looks. This space actually means something, and it causes an issue with, it gives you a really weird error that's hard to trace back. So make sure you don't put the space there. So I'm looking for an ID. I'm going to pass it our get parameter, and the get parameter will contain ID in it. PDO, : param underscore int, which says this has to be an integer. It will auto-magically cast it to an integer. And if it's not an integer, it doesn't matter. It will cast it anyways. I think it converts strings to nans. If it's not converting it to nans, it'll create it to zeros. So all this has done is it's taken this value, it's cast it to whatever data type we told it to be, and it will shove it into that spot. Now we have our SQL statement. Now we're ready to execute the SQL statement. So $stmt, execute. That executes the statement. And then now that it's executed, we can actually go fetch our user. So we're using fetch and not fetch all in this one because we only want one user. Sorry, that's an equals, not a skinny arrow. STMT, fetch. And that will return back our one user. We could modify our SQL statement if we wanted to guarantee only one user back. We could add limit 1 to the end of it, and it would only return back the first instance that it found of that user. But because it's an ID column, we should be able to rely on the fact that that is unique, and there's no chance of two users in the database with the same ID. So that'll give us back our user. I've already filled out the rest of the page for you. We already have the user's first name and last name. We're popping the user's avatar. All these details should just work. They're already filled out, ready to go. So our only step now is to actually go to our page and make sure the user loads. I'm gonna hit refresh, and I get Elnora Pagak. If you don't get anybody, try changing the ID number. That might help, and hopefully you'll get the user back. However, obviously, navigating to this page and changing the ID is the worst user experience ever, right? Let's turn this into a much better user experience. If you navigate to your index page, so view all users, we're going to turn each one of these names into a link that automatically points to their user profile. We'll do that, and then we'll take a break, and I'll help anybody who has a problem. All right, go to index.php under users. Scroll down to where the table is, and to where this for each loop is. And I think it's about line 57. You'll find the user first name and last name. Step 1, put a blank space right after the TD tag and before the closing tag so that you can see around this particular thing. Hopefully that will avoid people creating A tags outside of the TD tag. Next, we're going to create an anchor link. So that's an opening A tag and a closing A tag, and we're wrapping user in those A tags. Okay. All anchor links, to be worth anything, need an href, right? So we're going to create an href, and we'll just make it equal to an empty string right now. Using PHP, we will build this href dynamically so that it points to this user's profile, and as it goes through the for each loop, it will generate a new a link tag, right? A new hyperlink tag that points to that user, and it'll just do that for each one of them. So first, we want to echo out base path so that we're going to the correct location. /users/show.php with a question mark. ID equals. So this piece is the key that we'll be looking for. This is where the value will go, and obviously the value needs to be the thing that needs to be dynamic, right? Because it should not be a hard-coded value. It needs to be whatever value we need for this particular user. The good news is we already have the information we need. For example, we're doing user first name here. There, we'll just do user ID so that we can actually spit out that user. So I'm going to add in another set of PHP tags with a short echo tag. and then type in $user ID. So that is your complete href tag. It's a bit of a mouthful. I will say these tags get a little confusing because you're jumping in and out of PHP, which can be a little confusing. Just remember that this shorthand here means echo, right? It's just a shorthand for echo. We're echoing out the base path, then we close. Then in just regular HTML, we type /users/show.php !ID equals. This is the first part of our template, basically. Then we jump back into an echo statement and we echo out user ID, which will echo that user's ID, and then we close, and then we close our quote. So it gets a little confusing because you're jumping in and out of PHP, but it's a common thing, and I definitely recommend practicing it so that you get used to it. Anybody still typing that out? No? Confident it's going to work? Sure you are. Let's go. Jump over to the browser. Hit refresh. You should have links, and if you hover over them, you should see at the bottom here, localhost content06 lesson 4 Wednesday user show.php ID equals with a number, and the number should change as you hover over each one of these, right? So this one's 12, this one's 13, so on and so forth. If you click on them, you'll get to see their derpy face. If you click back and click on a new one, a new derpy face. If that's not working for you, then you likely have an error. And we'll have to look at what the error is. All right? So that's a good place to stop. We'll stop and take 15 minutes. So 8:30 we'll resume. And then we'll try to get done whatever we can get done between 8:30 and 10 o'clock. Yeah, and I'll help anybody who has an error. Let me get this screen back over. Come on, gestures. There we go. So we should be able to see the little users now with their pictures. These pictures are being generated with a API called Adorable Avatar, I think. And basically what it does is it takes a string, any string, doesn't matter what the string is, and then it uses the string to figure out these different details. So it will add eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and a head color, and it does it based on the string. So whatever you type in will cause that to produce that way. So I'm not sure, did we do the form? I don't think we did we? If you go to register, click on register. Yeah, do you have this? And then we sent the data to create, right? Actually, well, why am I asking you? We can actually just do it. There we go. Oh, yeah, okay, so cool. We've done things. I don't know why we skipped over show, but we managed to skip over show, but we have the form. That's good. So now we're on to the create.php page. There's a couple of things we need to cover before we actually finish off this create.php page. Cool, that's awesome. By the way, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but if you try different email addresses, you get different pictures, right? And they always look this kind of like derpy, goofy looking face, but this is the way it is. All right. The first thing we're going to talk about before we actually get into creating a brand new user is we're going to talk about variable scope. So I'm sure you guys know about variable scope. How many of you have heard of variable scope? No? Okay, so what variable scope is, it's the visibility of a variable within your application, right? So in Java itself, like I don't code Java, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in Java, if you define a variable in a class, that variable is not available to you in another class, right? It's not exposed. It's encapsulated within the class that you defined it in, right? In JavaScript, which I'm more comfortable with, in JavaScript, if you define a variable within a block, so a block is literally anything with a set of curly braces, And this is using, for those of you that know JavaScript, the let or const modifiers. If you define a variable within this block, it's not accessible here and not accessible here. It's not accessible outside of the block. It is only accessible within the block. That's it. You can't access it anywhere outside of the block. That's variable scope. PHP, oh my God. PHP unfortunately doesn't have variable scoping quite as rigid as other languages. It can be a little frustrating. You can wind up causing variable integrity issues. You can contaminate your variables quite easily by simply overwriting them. So one of the things we learned in the first week is that PHP is a duck type language. It's a very loose language. It's not strictly typed. Java would be considered strictly typed, which means you have to define your data types. You have to instantiate your variables. You know, there's a lot more rigidness to it. PHP is loose typed, which means variables can be a number at one point in your application and be an array at another point, a string at another point, and final it off with a Boolean. Like, they don't care. They'll just shift their values, and it doesn't matter. The other issue with PHP is that variable scope. Variables are scoped to functions. They are scoped to classes, and that is it. Which means if you have a variable defined inside a block, like an if condition, a while loop, or a for each loop, that variable is accessible outside of that as well. So you can wind up with contaminating your variables. And the reason why I bring this up is because week 3, we made a connection script, and we've been including it at the top of every one of our files. Let's go take a look at what that connection script looks like. Go ahead and open up the connect.php. If you look at this file, you will see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables that we have defined. All 5 of these variables are at the top level of our file. When we include a file, when we take a file and include it into another file, it literally copies the contents, like literally copies these contents and pastes it into that other file. So let's think about that from a programming perspective. If I copy the contents of this and paste it into another file, I have now defined 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables in that file. Only now it's harder for me to know what they are because I have this little include script, but I don't actually see the contents of this, right? Which means I need to be careful because I can accidentally overwrite con, right? Which would be bad because now I've lost my connection. I can accidentally overwrite my password, so now my connection won't work properly because I've overwritten it, or my username, or my database name, or the host name. So these things we need to be careful about. So what are ways that we can actually avoid variable contamination? There's a few different ways. One, if the data is not going to change and it's always going to stay the same, and we are not going to change these values through the course of our application, we can take these variables out and replace them with another type of container. Does anybody know what that other type is called? It's where we store things that don't change. Blockbuster video. Till they go tits up, right? No. Anybody else want to try? Yes, a constant. Variables, I mean, it's in the word. Variable. It's meant to change. It's meant to be variable, right? Constant, again, in the word. It's constant. It's reliable. It's good old faithful. It's not going to change. Always sticking around. So that is one way we can deal with this. We can actually label these out as constants. They'll never change. We have them through the course of our whole system. If we accidentally define another constant with a different value, it will blow up and tell us that this constant is already defined. So we have protection. We have data protection. That's a good idea. Constants are a great idea. However, constants have some issues as well because people will include these files and then they will try to attempt to redefine a new constant and it will blow up and they'll have to trace it back, figure out what the problem is, and then define another one. So they're still going to have to go through some legwork to deal with it. So yeah, we can define them with constants. That's one way. The other way is to turn it into a function. Variables in PHP, if you define them in a function, they cannot be accessed outside of the function. They are scoped within the function, which is great because we can now take all of these variables, put them into our function, call our function connect or whatever we're going to call it, and then we can still define variables in our application called host, DB name, username, and password at any other point, and we don't have to worry about variable contamination because we're not going to overwrite those variables. So yes, functions, super fantastic, very easy. You know what? Why don't we write one? Let's wrap this in a function. So right after this PHP tag, let's write the keyword function. We'll give it a name. I'm going to call it connect. Give it a set of brackets. This is usually where your arguments would go. And then the curly braces to open and close the function. Next, we want to make sure we wrap this content, this logic into the function so that closing curly brace we created, go ahead and delete that closing curly brace so that you only have the opening curly brace, right? Scroll to the very bottom of the page, hit enter so you're on a new line, and write the closing curly brace. And then write yourself a comment. This is usually a good idea to say closes function and save it. So now we have a function that encapsulates all of our logic inside of it. And I'll use the collapsing so that you can see it. So you see if I collapse it, you can see that this function wraps all of our logic. So if I want to connect, all I have to do is call the connect function. That's it. Everywhere this page is included will now have the connect function available to it because it will copy this definition. That's what this is called, by the way, a function definition. It will copy this definition and paste it to the top of the page. So why don't we go correct those? And then I'll show you a super sexy way to define a function that doesn't really need to be called every time, that will just invoke itself automatically, okay? But first, let's go write this everywhere. So the only two pages that we actually do any database connection stuff is index and show, right? Users index and users show. So let's start at users index. Scroll to the very top here. You can see here we have our include once root.includes.connect.php. Well, that's where our function lives. So all we need to do is define a variable called con and make it equal to connect. However, we have one other step that we need to do as well that I forgot about. Right? So we have our function, we've called it, and we're storing our connection in here. However, we're actually not storing anything because if you look at the connect script and you follow down to the bottom, you'll notice something is missing. Can anybody see what's missing? Be applicable with any language, yeah. Exactly. We have no return statement. Without a return statement, this thing would return absolutely nothing. So at the very bottom, just above our curly brace where we closed our function, we're going to return $con. So that'll return the connection we defined in here. Dust falling from the ceiling. Or I'm losing it. Probably losing it. All right, so we returned our connection. Now, when we call this connect function, it will actually store that con value into here, right? So let's go to show and do the same thing. Just come up here, $con equals connect with a set of parentheses to execute it. And then once you've done that, it's usually a good idea when you make changes like that to go check and make sure everything is still working. So open up your browser, go to all users, click on one of the names, and then that will tell you that both show and index are working. So I'm going to go to my browser. I'm going to go to all users. Sure enough, I can see everybody still. I'm going to click on one of the names, and it's still working. All right, I promised you a super sexy way of doing this. The super sexy way is quite a bit different because we don't need a function. We're really just trying to encapsulate those values. I don't want those values spilling out. I would recommend, if you're just comfortable with what we've done, just leave your code the way it is, okay? Don't make any modifications. If you want to try it the other way to encapsulate our variables is called an iffy. Does anybody know what an iffy is or ever heard of an iffy? No? It is IIFE, which stands for instantly invoked function execution. Basically a function that executes itself, right? The cool thing about this function is it doesn't have a name, so it's anonymous. It doesn't need a name because it's only ever executed once. And the whole purpose of it is just to scope your variables so that your variables don't bleed out into the rest of your application. That's the only reason it's used. The way it would look, just to give you an idea, you would create a variable, right? Actually, it would probably make more sense to create a constant in this scenario, but we'll just, for argument's sake, we'll use con. You get rid of the name because you don't need the name at all, like so. You wrap the function in a set of parentheses, which basically tells the interpreter to execute this thing. No, sorry, it doesn't tell it to execute. It tells it to evaluate this thing, right? Evaluate this first before you do anything else. Then you use the execution operator, like so, and you're done. That is an instantly invoked function. What will happen is the interpreter will evaluate the function definition in between the parentheses and add it into memory. The parentheses that are after it, the execution operator, which is this thing here, will actually execute the function for us. No name, no fuss, no muss. I don't have to keep this function around. I use it once. It's automatically assigned off to the connection. I'm done. The only variable I now have bleeding in my system is this variable here. That's it. The only variable I have bleeding into the system. Now, all I need to do under index is comment out that line because I don't need it anymore, or get rid of it altogether, and do the same thing in show. Comment it out. I don't need it anymore. If you're not comfortable with that instantly invoke function, which I don't expect you to be. You don't have to be. Feel free to not use it. Just leave everything the way it was, but make sure that everything's still encapsulated in a function call. The other way that we can encapsulate, but we're not going to demonstrate right now, is we can use a struct. What a struct is it's essentially a class object that is automatically instantiated and exists, right? So instead of you having to create your class blueprint and then instantiate it, you just immediately create the object, and then you can start dynamically giving it new properties and methods. You just shove them in, right? So that's another way, because what that will give us is namespaced properties, which means now we can set host, we can set DB name, username, and password, and store them as properties under this struct, and they're all nicely namespaced. So that's another way. And then the last way, which is probably the way that you will eventually achieve in your career, is to use a class. You would build a connection class. You would define a constructor. Have you guys done classes? Yeah. You would define a constructor. In the constructor, you would take in the DB name, the host name, all that type of information. You would assign it to properties of that class, and you would return back a class instance. And then now you can use that class to access the connection detail, right? All five examples are in the notes if you want to take a look at them. Feel free to implement whatever example you want to. I will say this, though. If you use a class or you use structs in your project, that definitely will get you a bonus mark, just to be aware. All right, cool. Any questions about ifs? Any questions about functions in general? Any questions about variable scoping that we just did? No? Awesome. Cool. So this all leads to the fact that we have to do this because when the user registers, we're going to take their information back. We're going to take their password, and we're going to do some stuff to it, and then we're going to store it in a variable called password, which now we have a problem because our connect script had a variable called password, and we would overwrite that, right? So now we would have an issue anywhere else we try to do any connections or any type of stuff inside our script, so because it would bleed out. So by encapsulating this, we won't have that issue. How do I want to do this? All right. Go ahead and close those off. Jumping back to SuperGlobals. SuperGlobals, we have get, post, and sessions. And I told you that get is good for using, for reading values, reading data from the database, right? And we're using that in our show. Post is good for manipulating data, creating, updating, or destroying data, because semantically it has that kind of meaning. Sessions are good when we need to carry information from request to request and keep track of that information. And I mentioned that there's a few different places that we do that. One is to maintain that a user is logged in so that we can keep track of their authentication. Two is in flash notifications, which are basically messages from us to the user. And then three is in keeping track of form data. Before we build the create script, we need to do a little bit of legwork and build ourselves a flash notification system so we can create a two-way communication with the user. And then we also need to build a way to send the form data back so they have a good user experience. Flash notification is a very common practice that you're going to find inside applications that you guys build, whether it's in PHP or whether it's in another language, it doesn't matter. The concept is always the same, right? Basically what the idea is that the user has done some sort of event. They've either created something, deleted something, updated something. They've done some sort of event, right? You want to be able to tell them that what they did either worked or didn't work, right? Either this thing was successful or it failed. One of those two things happened, right? In order to do that, you need some way to communicate to that user, some way to give them a message, pass a message on. What flash notification will allow us to do is be able to record messages, and then when the user finally hits a point where they can actually view those messages, we'll display those messages on their screen. It lasts for the time that they're there. The second they move to another page, all those messages will disappear, and we restart the whole process all over again, right? In order to do that, we're going to need to add some things into one of our fairly global files, the header file that we attach to every single page that we're working with. We're going to attach some content in there to handle our Flash data. And then we're also going to create a new partial called Flash Notification, which will actually display the Flash notification messages. One other thing we need to be cognizant of is, yes, we're going to record session flashes to the session. Session data stays persistent through the entire lifespan of the application, which means if we record a bunch of flash messages in there and we're always showing those flash messages, there's a potential chance of that flash message never disappearing and it just lasting for every single page to go to. And now they're having a crappy user experience because it doesn't make any sense at that point. So we need to be cognizant of getting rid of those flash messages. So we show them and then get rid of them the second they've been displayed, okay? And we're going to do it in a very simplistic way. We're not going to do it that complex. So what I'd like you to do first, we'll open up the header page or the header file. We'll scroll to the very top and you'll see some steps in there. The first step is to start the session. Now we need to be careful. I'll show you something kind of interesting. Type in session start, okay? And then immediately after it, type session start again. And hit save. When we do sessions, it actually reaches out and creates it either creates or resumes the session that is currently in process, but it sends out header information. You're only allowed to send one header packet through your browser. Any more than one header packet, and you'll get an error. This process will actually wind up sending two header packets and will cause an error in our screen. If you go to your browser and hit refresh, you'll see what I mean. Session start. Session has already been started, ignoring in CWAMP, blah, 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 on line 5. Here's where the problem is going to happen. Quite often, you're going to start a session and forget that you have a session already started somewhere else in another include script. And you're going to wind up with this error because you can't have the session started more than once. So how do you get around it? The way we get around it is we can use another session helper called session status, which will tell us if the session is currently running. We can wrap that in an if condition. So we'll do if. I'm going to highlight this plus the parentheses and hit the parenthesis key to create parentheses around it. So if session status equals PHP underscore session none, which is a constant that PHP creates once the server is operational. So if there is no session, is basically what this is saying, then start a session. Once you're done that, if you jump back to your HTML page and hit refresh, the error should go away. If it doesn't, double check your syntax. Boop, all gone. So I'm going to go ahead and remove line 4 with just a simple session start, and I'm going to leave the conditional session start in place. That will protect me from accidentally trying to start a session if one is already started somewhere else. Our next step is to take our session variable, which we don't have quite yet, but we're going to pretend. We're going to pretend we have a session variable and it has a bunch of flash messages in it. We want to take that variable and assign it to another variable. And the reason we want to do that is because, like I was saying before, we want to get our session flash messages out and then get rid of them, clear them out, because we don't need them anymore after that point. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called flash data underscore data, and we're going to make it equal to $_session, and the key we'll use for our flash messages will just be flash. However, we're going to encounter a problem. We are attempting to access this key in session, which means we're making the assumption that this key is defined and that there's values inside of it. We're making that assumption. The problem is, egg on our face, it blows up on us because we don't actually have that key defined yet. We haven't actually stored anything in there. It doesn't exist yet. So what we need to do as good little programmers, we need to account for the chance that something isn't there. There's a way we can do this. We can do it the real long way. The real long way is we go is set question mark session flash otherwise null. That's the long way. That's called a ternary. Ternary is like an inline if condition. It basically says, is the session flash set? If it is, go ahead and return session flash, otherwise return null. But since PHP 7, we've actually been able to get rid of a huge chunk of this and just do this instead, which means the exact same thing. It checks that value. If it's set, it'll return it back. If it's not, then it'll return whatever on the right-hand side of the question mark. Incidentally, this structure, though not using the same operator, this structure exists in almost every programming language I've ever been in. You may have to try it in Java, but you could put your variable here. So you could have v3 equals, here's variable 1, or variable 2. If Java supports this like C does, and C++ does, and JavaScript does, and Ruby does, and so many other languages do, Python, a whole bunch of them, if it supports this, what will happen is var1 will be stored into v3 if var1 contains a value. If it doesn't, then var2 by default will be stored into var3. So it will default to the other side. PHP, unfortunately, supports that syntax but returns a Boolean. It doesn't return the value, which is kind of annoying. All right, so we have our session value stored in our flash data. Our next step is to clear the session variable so it is blank. That way it doesn't wind up showing up the next time they go to another page. And we just do that. We'll use unset because we don't want to clear all of the session values, just this session value, underscore session flash. So that will unset the session flash, which is fine because we already have it stored in a variable. And now the data from that variable can be passed on to any other piece that we have inside here. And the piece we're going to actually pass it on to, we're going to create a new partial called flash, and that will be where we actually display the messages. All right. So the first thing we should do, is everybody got that typed out? Yeah? All right. The first thing we should do is take a look at what the flash structure is going to look like. So here it is here. This is a hash. So this part to this part here is the value that will be stored in the flash variable, okay? And inside there, that's our hash. It has two keys. It has success and it has error, but that's actually wrong. We're actually going to call it danger, and you'll see soon why we're going to do that. But it can have more than that. It might have info, it might have warning, whatever type of messages you want to transfer back, you can transfer back through here. Each one of these keys will have a value of an array, and that array will store messages, right? That will be stored under that data type. So it's not one error message. You can actually return back 25 error messages. You can return back 25 success messages. You can do whatever you want. You just keep popping them into this particular array. So that leads us to the next step, which is creating our actual Flash notification. So if you open up your side panel and click on the flash.php under partials, you'll see this window here. And it says, step 1, check if the variable flash data is set and has data. And the reason why that is because we don't want to create any HTML structures that aren't necessary. We only want to create it if there's any actual flash data. So we're going to go if, nice little if condition, if not, so I'm using the exclamation character, if not empty, empty, and then I'm going to give it the array, $flash data, which is that variable we just defined. So if flash data is not empty, meaning if there's stuff inside of it, if it contains a value and it's not undefined or not set, take off that parenthesis, come down here, and put that parenthesis down here. Closes if condition. There we go. Oh, I think I'm one over. There we go. So if it's not empty, step 2, iterate over the data and assign the key to the type and the value to the message variable. Because the array we're iterating over actually has keys, we can actually take those keys and use them as values and store them in a variable. And then we can use their value and store that in another variable. And that's going to be beneficial because we're actually going to use the type as a way to change the color of the actual error message. So we're going to do for each $flash data as $type. And if I left it there, it would take each row and just shove it into type. But I wanted to shove the key into type. So I'm going to do the fat arrow, $messages with an S. And then I'm going to move this parenthesis down here and say closes for each. Oops, I spelled that one wrong. Bonk. There. So you should have 2 closing parentheses now at this point. So that's going to iterate over the flash data hash. It's going to take the key, which if you looked at our hash was success and error. So it will take success the first time and it will store it underneath type. And then it will take the array of messages and store them under messages. And then the next time it iterates, it will store error under type and then the messages and store them under messages. So next, we need to actually create the div tags, which will be where our messages will actually show up. So we're going to echo. We're not going to jump out of PHP. We'll just write the HTML right in PHP. Div class equals single quotes and a closing thing. And this class style is a bootstrap one. It's alert dash. And then we can use string interpolation because we're using double quotes. And we're going to shove $type in there. And then down here, we're going to echo and close out our div. So this is just a div. Double quotes will actually do string interpolation, which means variables will be evaluated, and whatever the variable's value is will be put into place, right? These curly braces just basically help us define that this is an interpolated value. So this part here where it says alert and alert dash, this is just Bootstrap syntax for Bootstrap, like Twitter's Bootstrap, the styling framework. And basically what it will do is, if it's success, it'll be this nice lime green. If it's info, it'll be like a bright blue. Danger is like a reddish color. I don't know why they went with danger instead of error, but they went with danger. So now all we have to do is, in the middle of those divs, we'll write another for each statement. This one will iterate over messages, and we'll just store them as message. And all we have to do here now is echo out $message with a break tag, so each one shows up on its own line. But it'll be surrounded by that div of color. Now, if we want to test this, we'll have to actually build our structure in order to test this, but that's a good idea because then you can at least see what it looks like. All right. I think this is one of those ones that I'm going to copy. I'm going to go into Slack, and I'll paste it into Slack. It's definitely one of those trickier ones. There you go. Just be careful. I've noticed something weird with Slack, and I don't know if it's because it doesn't do this when I do it from work and I use a Linux machine at work, but it seems to do it from here, and I think it has something to do with parallels. When I copy content from here and I post it into Slack, and then you guys copy from Slack and post into your IDE, I think what it's doing, weirdly enough, is instead of just creating a universal new line character like it's supposed to, I think it's actually creating a /r/n character, which is a return new line character. This thing is causing errors in PHP because PHP encounters it, WAMP encounters it, and then WAMP blows up and says, I don't know what this thing is, and then you get weird integer errors and stuff. So if you've copied from Slack, go to each line. If you have a blank line, right, and there's code here and code here, delete this line and then hit enter to create the new line character again. Pain in the ass, I get it, but that will at least stop this error from occurring. It only seems to happen to some of you. It doesn't seem to happen to everybody, just some of you. All right. Go to header. We'll create just well, first let's go to our browsers, make sure everything's still working okay and things aren't blowing up. Yep. You should get no response if everything's okay. Then go to PHP on the header. And just in the top here, we'll just, actually, sorry, not there. We'll do it right after where you start the session. We'll create a new session variable called flash. And we'll make it equal to, we'll do this in steps. We'll make it equal to an empty array. Okay. Just so our code looks a little nice and clean, I'm going to hit enter and put a space between those square brackets. And then I'm going to type out my two values. Success and danger. So right now, this is just an array. And if you were to look at this, it would have the indices 0 and 1, just like any array would. But no, we're going to be cheeky. We're going to use success as a key. So we'll body shame an arrow, type in a fat arrow, and make it equal to an empty array. And then do the same thing for danger. So now you have an array of keys and values. Next, put your cursor in the middle of there and just type yourself any message you want to type. Hello world, you are successful. And I'm going to type one more. Wowzers, you're amazeballs. Oh, don't put a parenthesis or a semicolon in there. And then under danger, I'm going to write, what were you thinking? You should be ashamed of yourself. I should be ashamed of myself that it took me 3 times to write that sentence. Now, incidentally, we're only really going to use success and danger, but you do have other ones available to you too. You could write a warning, right? You have 30 seconds till detonation. And we can write info. You should probably look at the last warning. There's a few other alerts that Bootstrap will provide you. There's primary and secondary, light and dark. I don't know why light and dark, but they're there. These are the ones that are actually more, I would say these almost coincide with typical logging errors that you might see in an application. So once you have that all typed out, everything should work. If you jump back to your browser and hit refresh, no, oh no, we forgot a step. Does anybody know what we might have forgotten to do? Let's trace this back. What file displays those errors for us, or displays those messages for us? The Flash, right? The flash.php page. That will display the errors for us. If you scroll down towards the bottom of this page, you'll notice step 4. We need to include the flash.php page. Otherwise, it won't work. So we'll just do an inline include. Partials underscore flash.php. There we go. We now have our Flash page. All right, anybody still typing? No? All right. So just check the top, make sure yours has some stuff in it. It doesn't matter, we're going to delete this big block out anyways. So it's not really a big deal. Jump back to the browser, hit refresh, and you should see your notification messages. Now, Bootstrap also supports dismissible notifications. And all you have to do that is go take a look at the Bootstrap documentation and add that as attributes to your div, the div that we defined in the notification block, okay? And then you'll have dismissible notifications. Now, just to make sure, you notice if we hit refresh, it just stays persistent, and that's because we're literally redefining it every single time, right? So if you want to keep that, you can keep that. Just comment it out so that it disappears. And now if you go back to your browser, the first time you hit refresh, it will stay there. The second time you hit refresh, it will disappear. Okay? Which means our actual clearer is working properly. I'll post the header page for you. So we can move on. There you go. Sorry. So just like Flash, I also want to be able to have the form data that the user enters so that I can pre-populate the form when they make a mistake, because users will make a mistake. They will type things in wrong, or perhaps you made a mistake. You didn't provide them enough information so they knew what to enter. We had that happen to us today. We were using the Zoom communication tool to communicate with our Vancouver office, and my CTO was filling out the form, and one of the fields says fill out a phone number. So he types in the stupid phone number. He moves to the next form field, and it immediately changes his phone number so there's a plus sign in front of it. But the problem is he was typing in 1-705-555-5555, right? And what this stupid thing was doing, it was jamming +1 in front of that, which means now it's not a legitimate number anymore. So then he thought, okay, well, that's fine. I'll just take my 1 out. So he removed his 1. Moved on to the next thing. What does it do? It typed in +1 +1 for some bizarre reason. And he kept trying to modify this, and under no circumstances would it correct properly. And then even to make matters worse, he couldn't continue unless he entered the stupid phone number. So he gave up, right? And things like that annoy people, but obviously that's that developer's fault. And if you submit that form, it bounces back and tells you you're missing that entry, right? So we need to be able to at least repopulate the form, especially if it's a big form, like this horrible one that I had to build 2 years ago now. I think it's about 2 years ago. So this is Pine Ridge Pet Center. Super nice people. We had a debate about this form. I work for an SEO company now, right? But I've done search engine optimization for quite a while. And I can tell you from a user experience, if you have more than 8 fields, and specifically 8 fields in your form, your bounce rate will increase. Bounce rate is the number of people who hit the site and go, fuck no, and leave. That's your bounce rate. If you have a form with more than 8 fields, unless people really want access to whatever that is, they will likely bounce. This form, I have a dog, his name's Murray. This form just never ends. It just keeps going. And some of these fields, when you click on them, will actually produce other fields as well. I think this one does. No, there's another one here. Oh, here it is. See? Produces more fields for you. And of course, once you've filled out this whole form and you click add an animal, you're hoping the form will submit. And if it doesn't and it bounces back, at the very minimum, all the data you entered in here should wind up in there, right? It shouldn't wind up empty. Because if you get a user that hits that form after the 10 minutes it took them to fill out that form and then they hit submit and it comes back empty, yeah, they're either going to launch their computer or they're going to bounce. More likely they will bounce. So it's up to us as developers to make sure we create a better user experience, especially in scenarios like this where we need to make sure that whatever data they've entered, we return back to the form for them. Now, we have a tiny form. We don't have much of a form at all. We only have 5 fields, but it's still a good idea to at least return the first name, the last name, and the email address so that all those data points are in there. And the way we're going to do that is kind of basically the same way that we're dealing with the Flash. in our header field, like in our header file, we're going to create a new session, sorry, not create a session variable. We're going to access a session variable. We're going to create a variable called form data, and we're going to store the values that might potentially be in this in that form data variable. And then I'm also going to give a fallback just in case. Just in case it's not set, which it likely won't be all the time. And then once I've done that, just like I did with the flash, I'm going to unset it. And I'm going to be cheeky, Alt-Shift down, and change this to form underscore data. So the flash messaging, why we unset it is because we don't want those notifications sticking around, right? Because every time we add a new one, it would just create this giant list of notifications, and the user wouldn't even see content. All they would see is notifications, right? The form data, not exactly the same idea. The reason why we don't persist the form data, we take the form data, we store it once, and then we unset it. Whatever page we send them to will have the form data for that first piece, like for the first landing. After that, we're going to remove that form data. So if they fill out the form and they're successful, we will clear the form data after that. So the first page they hit, they'll still have the form data. The second page they go to, it will be gone, which is good. We're obviously not going to send them to a page with a form. We'll send them to, I don't know, if they log in successfully, we'll probably send them to the users page so they can go see all the users. Or if they are not an administrator, we'll send them to the profile page. But either way, we'll make sure they go to a page that doesn't have a form. We want to make sure we unset this. Otherwise, every time they go to a page with a form, this form data will wind up inside that form, which can be a little alarming to people when they're not expecting that. Users expect to see the form data when they hit the form after they've made a mistake. They do not expect to see it when they hit a form brand new, right? It should be empty. So let's make sure we fix all that. We need to go into the form itself and actually display this data in the form. So open up users form. And our first step, because there's no guarantee that this page has been included, and we're going to be accessing a variable throughout it, we want a fallback. So what we're going to do up at the top here, we're going to create a nice inline PHP statement, and we're just going to write form underscore data equals form underscore data or null, just so we have a fallback, just in case for some reason form data is not defined. That helps us avoid an error. Next, what we want to do is we want to add a new attribute to each of the inputs. And the class yesterday said they had never seen this before. There's an attribute that's available for inputs called value, and it allows you to preset the value. Don't confuse it with placeholder. Placeholder's different. Placeholder will actually tell you what you're expecting, but it doesn't actually fill the field with anything. So if you submit it, it's still technically empty. Value is actually a value that you're shoving into that field, and so it actually will submit and pass on to the next page as that value. So what we can do is we can pre-populate our form with that value. So we'll write value equals and a set of quotes. And our value is going to be very simple. We're basically going to check to see if the form data field exists. If it does, then we'll show it. If it doesn't, then we will do null. So we'll use an inline echo statement. And it's literally form underscore data, question, question, null. Actually, it's form underscore data, first underscore name is what it is, actually. Getting late. So that should display our form data and the first name. This will always correspond to this and to this, obviously. So now, just to save yourself a lot of work, copy from the closing quote all the way to the space character, actually, because we need to add this in 2 more places. Scroll down a little bit to where it says last name and paste that into place, and then change the key from first name to last name. And then the last place we'll do this is for email. We won't do it for passwords, and the reason we're not going to do it for passwords is there's 2 reasons. One, it's not going to do anything for the user anyways because the password field is set as password, and all they will see is the little dots. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second reason we're not going to do it is it freaks people out if they think you might potentially know what their password is, because they're going to ask the question, how were you able to repopulate the field with my password? You shouldn't know my password. The reality is we do, because we have to hash it. We have to work with it. We have to do something with it in order to get it into our database. We can't be anonymous with it entirely, but it freaks people out, and we just want to avoid that conversation. So we'll add it to email, we'll add it to last name and first name, but we'll leave the password that they have to fill it out each time. And there's the last one. And I think this form is fine. I think we corrected the, yeah, we did. We corrected the password confirmation thing last week. So that's it. Incidentally, not only did you create a better user experience for your user now, you've also actually created your edit field logic. So remember how I said we're going to use one form for not only creating a user, but also updating the user, right? We can now actually just populate form data, send it back to this form, populate this form entirely from top to bottom, and now the user can go and edit their first name, their last name, and their email address. We won't allow a user to edit their password through here. Instead, we'll do a forced password reset, which is a much better approach than allowing them to do it within here. Cool. Any questions about pre-filling? No? Awesome. Let's test this. Open up well, first let's jump over to the browser, hit refresh, and make sure nothing's broken. Nothing's broken. Next, let's go to our create page. So open up the create.php page. And right now we have create a message system with post. Let's go ahead and start a session. So if session underscore start equals php underscore session none, then session start. Sorry, it's session status, not session start. The first one should be session status. Status. That was silly. Try that again. There we go. Sorry about that. It's much more thrilling to follow code when I'm moving the IDE around the screen. And you have to chase it down. All right, so that will start the session. Now I'm going to take our post, and this is the easiest thing you'll ever do in order to take all the data from the form and store it into the session form data value. Super easy. All we literally do is take post and assign it to it. So you take $_session form underscore data equals $post. And now all the data is sitting inside the session. All the keys, everything. Just exactly the same way we would access post will be the exact way we would access it off session form data, which you actually saw in the form. So now all that information is in there. And now actually just to demonstrate this so it's a little easier for you to grasp what we're doing, we're going to redirect. So what we'll do is you'll submit your form, it will hit this page, it will go through this logic, and then it will redirect us back to the form, okay? So we're going to do header, location, colon, and I think the location is just /new.php. Actually, we don't even need the dot. We'll just do this, new.php. And then super important, we have to exit. Because what will happen, and I haven't tested this, but I'm thinking about testing it to see if it's actually asynchronous. What will happen is this will redirect from here to the other page, but this page will continue to parse. This script will continue to parse. So what will happen is you've redirected to the other page, yet this thing's still executing code, right? So you want to make sure after you redirect, you exit. So that way it doesn't continue on executing the code on that page. I haven't checked to see if it's actually, sorry, not asynchronous, but threaded, but I don't think it is. Save it. Let's go give it a go. Is anybody still typing that out before I'll give you a few seconds. Wipe the board off. And we'll probably call it a night after this. And then don't forget next week, you guys are not here, right? You're on your reading week. So don't be stressing yourselves out by coming to school. All right, we good? Awesome. Jump over to the browser, hit refresh. Go ahead and fill out your form. Hit submit, and it should bounce back, and you should see your values still in the form, right? If you hit refresh, they'll disappear because they clear it. So once again, type in your values, hit submit, the form will bounce back, and you will see those values. If you really want to be sure that it's actually hitting that page, why don't we $_session form _ data equals error, more square brackets, you done goofed. Oh, why did I write form data? Sorry, flash is what I meant to write. There we go. We'll send back a flash message just to be sure that we actually hit the create page and that it's just not some funkery with the browser. Okay. Just make sure you've drawn this as an array inside those square brackets. I haven't formatted this nice and cleanly. Jump back over to your browser. Hit submit. You done gone goofed up at the top. The reason why it's not colored is because we said error instead of danger. Change that to danger. Nope. Jeez, why do I keep clicking that? Stop. There we go. Submit. Now it's in color. All right. Quite a bit of crap we learned tonight, that's for sure. SuperGlobals, variable scoping. What else did we do? Flash messaging systems, form data, whole heck of a lot of stuff to cover. What I would recommend is if you're still having issues with simple things like including scripts or variables and stuff like that, I would recommend going over that stuff. Last week, I haven't posted it yet. I will post it this week. I created some exercises that you can actually go through. I'll publish the answers as well as the exercises themselves, and then you guys can actually use those to practice. And it walks you through practicing, defining variables, defining constants, writing loops, using conditional statements, connecting to MySQL, doing inserts in MySQL, doing selects in MySQL, that type of stuff. So I'll post those, and I definitely recommend going over them if you're finding that you're still having difficulty with syntax or some of these concepts. Any questions about anything we did today? No? Cool. Have fun. Have a good reading week.